So, it's my great pleasure to welcome our first plenary speaker, Justin Scaini. Justin is the president of the Student Engagement Project for the JACT project in Toronto. Justin is a recent graduate of the Queen's University in Ontario, so congratulations to Justin. He's working now with a team of young people in downtown Toronto to synthesize the ideas collected at a program called Unleash the Noise, which is a mental health innovation summit, and developing that into a student-led mental health strategy. So we're really very keen to hear about this, and so please welcome Justin Scaini. Thank you.
Fine, thanks. All right, well, this is exciting. We have a bunch of people here that are ready to change the world, and that's always an incredible thing. My name is Justin Scaini, and I'm a modern young people. I'm always connected to the world around me, and I'm a master of texting, tweeting, Facebooking, and, well, social media-ing in general. I hold the wealth of the world's knowledge at my fingertips, which means that I'm going to take in more information in my lifetime than any generation in history. It's essentially expected that I acquire some sort of post-secondary education in my lifetime. And when I graduate, I'm going to come away with thousands of dollars of student debt and no guarantee of gainful employment because of the tough job market. But it's okay. I know I need to be competitive to get where I want to go, and I'm prepared to do that. When I was 7 years old, I fell off my bunk bed and broke my collarbone. I was immediately rushed to the hospital, and within a couple weeks, I was feeling great. And it was a cool story to tell my friends that I had a sling. I was 7. I thought it was cool. But when I was in university, I often found that I compared myself to my friends and my peers. I thought that everyone else was finding university far easier than I was. I thought I was the only one that couldn't find what I was passionate about, that didn't know what I wanted to do with my life. And those insecurities, they left a lot of stress and pressure on me. Stress and pressure that I dealt with behind closed doors because I didn't want to talk about them. I didn't want to talk to my friends about my weaknesses. I didn't want them to think that I couldn't cope with university. I didn't want to burden them with my problems. I didn't want to talk to my parents about it because I didn't want them to think that I wasn't prepared to be in a university education. And I didn't even know that talking to a counselor was an option. It just wasn't something that I was aware of. I didn't know that they help with things like that. And this is how I used to think about mental health. I used to think about it as something that should be talked about behind closed doors, something that just should be kept in the shadows because you should have to deal with your own problems. And that is so far from the truth, and it took me a long time to realize that mental health is just like your physical health, and it needs to be taken care of on a daily basis. I got involved in mental health 3 years ago, and before I got involved with the issue, I was oblivious to how important mental health was towards your overall well-being and quality of life. It wasn't something I thought about. It wasn't something that was part of my everyday thoughts and discussion. And as a result of that, I often found myself judgmental of others who spoke about mental health, who spoke about a mental illness. So in large part, stigma came from me. Just like in many ways, it came from people in this room as well. But after I got involved with mental health, with the JACT project in particular, I took a second to take a step back and look at what the landscape of mental health looked like in Canada. Looked at how resources were designed and delivered. Looked at how young people were going about raising awareness and shattering the stigma. And I noticed a key element to this landscape. I noticed that there was a top end and a bottom end. And I consider the top end the doctors, the policymakers, the researchers, the ones that are designing and delivering mental health services to help the young people, to help people like us. The bottom end is the young people. It's what we do at the JACT project. We're the ones engaging our peers. We're the ones that are opening up the conversation to everybody, to make this conversation accessible to everybody so that people know that they can seek help when they need it. So we've got these two ends working at the same time, but not necessarily working together. So after I took a scan of the landscape and noticed that that's sort of what it looked like, I identified 3 key areas of inefficiency, 3 key weak areas that I knew could be improved upon to improve that landscape and to make sure that everybody knew that mental health is something that's okay to talk about. The first problem I identified was that I found that how mental health was communicated was ineffective in some ways. I found that mental health was communicated in such a way that resonated with the 1 in 5 people that will suffer from a mental illness in any given year, which is fantastic because you really need to communicate with that 1 in 5. But it didn't do a good job of resonating with the other 4 in 5. the other 80% of the population that won't necessarily experience a mental illness in any given year. And in large part, stigma comes from that other 4 or 5. Stigma comes from that other 80%. So if you truly want to shatter the stigma of mental health, you have to get everybody thinking about mental health in the exact same way, which means that we have to change this conversation from being about the 1 in 5 to being about the 5 in 5, because mental health is truly something we all have. So problem number 1, how mental health was communicated. Problem number 2 is that I found the young people, the people that all of these services were being designed and delivered to help, were on the fringe. They were on the outside, really only acting as a voice, but not at the center of change. And if you truly want to create resources that look, feel, and sound like resources that other young people will want to use, you have to have young people at the center of designing those resources, at the center of change. So problem number 1, communication. Problem number 2, young people acting as a voice, not at the center of change. And the third problem I identified was that there was a lack of collaboration at all levels. There was a lack of collaboration amongst the top end, there was a lack of collaboration amongst the bottom end, and there was a lack of what I like to call vertical collaboration. Collaboration between the top end and the bottom end. And until you have that sort of collaboration, you're not going to be able to create an orchestrated effort to create the best services possible for young people. So those were the 3 key issues I identified. Communication, not being about the 5 in 5, not being about all of us. Young people acting as a voice, not being at the center of change, and ineffective collaboration at all levels. So I went on a mission to change that. And I came up with an idea of connecting people, connecting young people, creating collaboration from the bottom end. So in September of 2012, myself and the founder of the Jack Project, Eric Windler, we sat down and we discussed this idea of connecting people. We discussed what the potential was. We discussed what had already been done in Canada and where the holes were, the gaps that we needed to fill. And we expanded on that idea. We were going to have the first ever Student Mental Health Innovation Summit in Canada. Now, there are all sorts of conferences that happen. There are all sorts of different events that happen for mental health, which is fantastic. So what's going to make us different? What's going to help us solve those 3 problems that I just identified? Well, our summit was going to be entirely student-led, student-inspired, and student-organized. It was going to be by young people, for young people, which means that the delegates were going to be students, the speakers were going to be students, the organizers were going to be students. And that means that most people in this room wouldn't have been invited, which is a weird thing to think about. It's a real bottom-up approach that we wanted to take. And that's what we did. We wanted to find a way to get this conference out to the country in a way that resonated with the 5 in 5 people. So I put together a team of young people at Queen's University, and we brainstormed. We brainstormed about what we wanted this conference to look like. We brainstormed what we wanted the conference to sound like, and we talked about what we wanted the name of the summit to be. And now the name of the summit is critical, because a name captures imaginations. It captures people's attention immediately. So with the theme of being different, I told the team that I didn't want the words voice, speak, talk, mental health. I didn't want any of those words in the name of the conference because that's been done. So after 2 hours of brainstorming like you'd see in a movie, writing on whiteboards, pulling out our hair, wandering around the room, all that sort of stuff, we had our idea. We were going to call the conference Unleash the Noise. Unleash the Noise. What does that mean? Well, what fascinated me and the rest of the team was that when we went around the room discussing what Unleash the Noise meant to each of us, everyone had their own unique opinion about what it was. For a young woman on our team whose family has been dealing with mental health issues her whole life and has never talked about it, Unleash the Noise to her meant finally bringing this conversation into her family and finally putting it out in the open and shedding light on this topic of mental health. Cool, that's one good perspective. For another young man who's been suffering from schizophrenia and bipolar disorder, Unleash the Noise to him meant getting these voices out of his head and finding a way to get help and being brave enough to seek the support that he needs. All right, cool, so we've got 2 different perspectives of Unleash the Noise. And then it came to me. Now, of course, I was a little bit biased. To me, Unleash the Noise was about collaborating. It was about bringing people together, about bringing young people together to create one loud, unanimous voice for mental health. And that's what we did. This past March, we brought together 200 students from across Canada, literally representing every single province and territory in the country, and we talked about mental health. We talked about what the issues were. We talked about where stigma comes from. how the issues vary in rural versus urban settings, by high school and post-secondary demographics. We talked about all these different issues. But more importantly, we talked about a solution. We talked about how young people can go about being leaders and being at the center of change so we can take ownership of the issue of mental health. By the end of the summit, we had collected over 300 pages of innovative ideas that we were going to synthesize into a youth-led national strategy. So in about a month, we are going to be launching Canada's Mental Health Innovation Platform, which is going to be an online hub where students, student-led organizations, and committees across the country can connect. They can share what they've done, and they can share what their resources are for other young people across the country. And these are resources and organizations that have been designed by students and for students. And that's what's going to make this so incredible. But what's so magical about this whole thing, this whole process of Unleash the Noise, is that we gave young people more than a voice. We gave them ownership of mental health. We put young people at the center of change. We found a way to communicate with an entire country of young people, not just the 1 in 5. And I'm proud to say that everything we've heard, all the feedback we've gotten from the delegates, from everybody that's been involved, it's resonated with them. And now we're going forward with Unleash the Noise. The summit's going to become an annual conference, and it's actually recently been nominated as the most anticipated campus event in Canada next year. Imagine that, a mental health event being the most anticipated campus event in a country. I guarantee you that no one besides young people could have pulled that off. And that's what young people are capable of. We have the creativity, ambition, energy, and drive for change. So that's the basics about what we did. Now in the bigger picture, I want to talk about what we learned from this whole process and what we learned from young people. There are 2 key lessons that I pulled away from what we did. The first key lesson is that collaboration is very difficult. Meaningful collaboration is very difficult. It takes sacrifice and meticulous planning to get people to work together. And the type of collaboration that I'm talking about is people putting what they do best forward into a larger group of people to create a synergistic relationship that everyone can get on board with. And sometimes that takes putting a lot of what you do, a lot of your service on the back burner because it's redundant. And if we can do that sort of collaboration at all levels, we're going to create a much more powerful and cost-effective way to help young people. So we need better collaboration at the top end, better collaboration at the bottom end, like what I did with Unleash the Noise, and better vertical collaboration. And that's going to make all the difference in the world. Now, the second big thing I learned is that young people have a really strong voice. If given the opportunity, young people will amaze and surprise you with what they can do. And that's where we need to go. We learned what next-level youth engagement truly is. Next-level youth engagement isn't just CCing a bunch of young people on an email and asking their opinion. It's not giving them 3 options and saying, which one do you like best? Next-level youth engagement is giving young people leadership and ownership of a tough problem and allowing them to solve the problem. So now with those 2 things in mind, I want to leave people in the audience with a few challenges. To the doctors, the policymakers, the researchers in the room, I want you to think about some of the weaknesses in your service, some of the challenges you've been facing in your research. And I want you to give these challenges to a group of young people to see if they can come up with an eloquent solution. I guarantee you that those young people are going to amaze you with what they can come up with. To the parents in the room, bring this conversation of mental health into your families. Talk to your kids about it. Let your kids know that you're there to support them no matter what, that they don't have to have their life figured out by the time they're 18 years old. Just talk to them about mental health. That's going to change the way they think about mental health and change the way that they think about mental health going forward for their kids. To the young people, be leaders. Be leaders in your community. Be leaders amongst a group of friends. Be leaders in your own life. Implement change in your communities. Talk about mental health with your peers. Let your friends know that you're there to support them no matter what, that you're there to talk to them if they need any sort of help for their mental health. And seek help if you need it yourself. If you're having a hard time with something, talk about it. Talk about it with your friends. In hindsight, I wish I had talked about my friends with some of the stresses and pressures I was dealing with in school. It'll change your life. Now, I want to end with an example of how we like to deliver our messages with the Jack Project and how we like to make this conversation accessible to the 5 and 5. Let's talk about mental health. This isn't just a conversation about stigma or awareness or illness for that matter. It's a conversation about people, about all of us. We all have mental health. So think about this. Your brain is made up of 100 billion nerve cells. That means it works hard for you every day. It's the reason we dream. It's the reason we love, hope, have the ability to think. Not caring for your mental health, even when you feel great, is like the city of Manhattan not performing routine maintenance on Grand Central Station. So here's my question. Why is there stigma? Well, it's time for a reality check. Stigma has come from all of us at one point or another. Not in the language we use or our perception of what mental health is, but by the very fact that at one point, we have all been afraid to ask for help. We've all been afraid to talk to someone about our insecurities, feeling pressure to succeed, dealing with setbacks, and the list goes on. At some point, we've all feared asking for support. That's stigma. Let's fight back. Let's stigmatize the stigma. Stigmatize fear of a conversation about mental health. Stigmatize judgment for seeing a counselor. Stigmatize not reaching out for support. Be bold and take ownership of mental health. We all have it. Thank you.